Most people believe a government budget line means a government agency exists. In Nigeria's 2026 Appropriation Act, one line item says otherwise. A council with a fully staffed office in the Federal Secretariat, bank accounts with the central bank, and diplomatic contacts across Abuja received roughly 1.32 billion naira. And the presidency now says that council never legally existed. Not underfunded, not mismanaged, never created. So who built it? Who signed off on it without asking questions? And why did it take 2 years for anyone in government to notice? That's the story we're unpacking today. This isn't a story about one man in Osun State. It's a story about how Nigeria's public finance system actually checks or fails to check what it's paying for. If a body with no legal foundation can get office space in the seat of government, open accounts at the Apex Bank, and survive an entire budget cycle, the question isn't only who did this, it's what else could this expose, and how many other lines in the budget have never been verified this closely. Civil servants who processed real paperwork for a body that officially didn't exist are affected. Lawmakers whose appropriation process is now under public scrutiny are affected, and every Nigerian taxpayer whose 1.3 billion naira just became a subject of a federal investigation is affected. To understand how this happened, you need a short history lesson on Nigeria's presidential advisory bodies. In September 2019, President Muhammadu Buhari created the Presidential Economic Advisory Council, a real body with a legal mandate and named members. In March 2024, President Bola Tinubu created a successor structure, the Presidential Economic Coordination Council. The earlier advisory council was never formally dissolved, it simply faded from active use. That gap, a dormant but historically real name, still sitting in institutional memory, is where investigators say the exploitation began. By 2024, a new name enters the picture, the Presidential Foreign Intervention Promotion Council, or PFIPC. A man identifying himself as Prince Adeniyi Adeyemi begins presenting himself as its Director General. By April 2025, PFIPC letterhead is reportedly being used to request civil service staff deployments, and the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation processes that request. By May 2025, Adeyemi has reportedly met a National Assembly principal officer. Through 2025, the council operates out of space inside the Federal Secretariat, and multiple bank accounts are opened, including with the Central Bank of Nigeria. Then, in October 2025, police detain Adeyemi for 23 days following a petition from the Office of the Chief of Staff to the President before releasing him. That should have been the end of the story. Instead, PFIPC turns up in the 2026 Appropriation Act with a 1.32 billion naira allocation after his arrest, not before. Here's where the facts and the allegations need to be kept separate. Confirmed by the presidency, the PFIPC was never established by any law, executive order, or presidential approval. The government has publicly called it fictitious. Confirmed by court filings, Adeyemi faces an 8-count charge, case number FHC/ABJ/CR/562/2025, covering conspiracy, forgery, and impersonation. A bench warrant was issued after he missed an arraignment date, and he was arrested in Osun State shortly afterwards. Allegedly by investigators, he is said to have controlled around 34 bank accounts, including several tied to fictitious agency names, and to have secured Federal Secretariat office space and a request for land and offices across all 36 states. In his own account, given in an interview after his arrest, Adeyemi has said he approached Budget Office officials directly to push for PFIPC's inclusion, that the process wasn't finished before his October 2025 arrest, and that he doesn't know how the allocation ended up in the 2026 budget. He has also said in that same interview that a large sum, reported as roughly $400 million worth of Naira-dollar transactions in some accounts, moved through a now-deceased associate, and that he never personally met the Chief of Staff to the President. He denies paying any budget office official in cash, saying he offered only future job opportunities. The Chief of Staff's office has responded through counsel, saying it is cooperating with the anti-corruption investigation. None of Adeyemi's account has been independently verified in court. It is testimony from an accused person, not an established fact.
This is where the real design flaws show up. The Budget Office. A body can only receive a budget line if someone inside the appropriation process enters it. Adeyemi says he personally lobbied officials there. If true, that means a private individual's direct lobbying, not an executive order, is what got a fictitious agency funded. If false, it means someone inside government inserted it independently, which is arguably worse. The Office of the Accountant General. It processed a staff deployment request from PFIPC and reportedly posted it without confirming the agency's legal existence with the Secretary to the Government of the Federation's office. The Central Bank of Nigeria. Account opening for a federal agency ordinarily requires verification of that agency's legal status. Multiple accounts were reportedly opened regardless. The National Assembly. The Appropriation Act passed through committee scrutiny and plenary votes without the discrepancy being caught before publication, which is now the subject of a House of Representatives ad hoc committee probe and a Senate motion pushing for a similar inquiry. The gray area. Nigerian law doesn't clearly specify a single unified verification checkpoint that every arm of government must clear before a name enters a budget. That's not a loophole anyone had to hack. It's an absence. Who do you think stands to gain? Follow the incentives, not just the individuals. Adeyemi's incentive on his own account was straightforward: control of a council with foreign investment branding, offices, and eventually staff he could employ. The presidency's incentive now is containment. By publicly disowning PFIPC immediately and ordering an ICPC probe with a 30-day deadline, that's a standard institutional response. Get ahead of the story before opposition figures frame it as complicity. The National Assembly's incentive is oversight credibility. Senate and House inquiries let lawmakers show they're auditing the executive's budget process, even though the appropriation passed through the legislature's own hands first. The opposition's incentive is straightforward political leverage, using PFIPC as a symbol of broader concerns about budget padding and weak institutional checks, alongside other unresolved matters like the long-running dispute over NNPCC's unremitted funds to the Federation account. Who loses here regardless of what the investigation finds? Public trust in the line-by-line credibility of the federal budget. 1.3 billion naira is a small fraction of Nigeria's overall federal budget, but its symbolic cost is large. For investment climate, foreign partners already cautious about due diligence in Nigeria now have a documented case of a phantom agency reportedly interacting with diplomatic contacts. That's a reputational cost that outlasts the money involved. For public finance credibility, this arrives while unrelated but concurrent controversies like the unresolved dispute over NNPCC's remittances to the Federation account are already testing confidence in fiscal oversight. For civil servants, 3 government officials reportedly discovered their names on a PFIPC deployment letter without ever having heard of the agency, a direct hit to institutional trust in internal HR processes. There's no evidence of impact on inflation, employment figures, or healthcare and education spending directly tied to this case. It would be inaccurate to overstate the economic footprint. The real cost at this stage is confidence, not cash flow. The forgery and impersonation charges matter for a reason beyond this case. If official letterhead, appointment language, and presidential office branding can be replicated well enough to pass through the Budget Office, OAGF, and CBN, that's a vulnerability the state needs to close regardless of the final verdict on Adeyemi. The presidency's own language, describing a need to protect government identity against impersonation and forgery, reflects that concern directly. Civil society groups and opposition lawyers have already called for an independent probe rather than one confined to the ICPC alone, citing worries about institutional self-policing. This story crossed Nigeria's borders quickly. International outlets, including US press, picked it up largely through the lens of a government admitting a fake agency operating inside its own presidency for 2 years, a framing that lands hard regardless of the eventual legal outcome. For foreign investors specifically courted by PFIPC's Foreign Investment Promotion branding, the case is a live example of why verifying counterpart legitimacy, checking official gazettes, not just office addresses or titles, matters before any engagement. There's no indication yet of formal statements from ECOWES, the African Union, or major foreign governments treating this as a diplomatic matter rather than a domestic governance story. If that changes, it will likely center on the diplomatic contacts allegations rather than the budget line itself. Not everyone reads this the same way. One view, this is a story about one opportunistic individual exploiting bureaucratic gaps, a security and forgery case, full stop, and the institutional angle is being overstated. Another view, reflected in Nigerian commentary since the scandal broke, treats the fact that nobody in the presidency reportedly noticed a phantom agency operating in the federal secretariat for 2 years as the real story, arguing the individual case is almost secondary to what it reveals about internal oversight. A third, more cautious view, because Adeyemi is an accused person whose court matter is still pending, and because his own account has not been tested under cross-examination, neither narrative should be treated as settled. The House and Senate enquiries and the ICPC's 30-day report are the actual mechanisms that will move this from allegation to established fact. 3 things to watch. First, the ICPC report deadline. If it names additional officials, expect a wider set of resignations, suspensions, or referrals than we've seen so far. Second, the September 30th arraignment date. Whether Adeyemi appears and what pleas entered will shape whether this becomes a prolonged trial or a fast plea negotiation. Third, whether the National Assembly's ad hoc and Senate enquiries produce procedural reforms, a formal verification checkpoint before any name enters an appropriation bill, or whether, as critics of past probes have warned, the story fades from the news cycle before structural change follows. The likely near-term outcome, continued investigation, more names surfacing among the officials who processed PFIPC paperwork, and a court case that moves slower than public attention will. We opened by asking how a line in a national budget can fund something that by the government's own account was never real. The honest answer at this stage is not through a single failure but through several: a dormant name available for reuse, paperwork processed without a phone call to confirm legitimacy, and an appropriations process with no single gatekeeper positioned to catch it. What we don't yet know, whether officials knowingly assisted, whether the money traced through associates reached anyone inside government, and what the ICPC's investigation ultimately concludes, is exactly what determines whether this becomes a footnote or a genuine turning point in how Nigeria checks its own books.
Watch the arraignment date. Watch the ICPC deadline. That's where this story moves from allegation to record. Click the subscribe and notification button to receive first-hand in-depth analysis from the 9-jar political lens.